Okay, good evening and welcome to our weekly Q&A. So this is TJ from Passend Education, a specialist in highly gifted education and on a mission to make gifted kids more happy, autonomous and successful. And this week we're going to be talking about how to manage your emotions yourself as a parent of gifted kids. So let's start with the basis of where we've been building our entire methodology on with the kids, but it works just as well for parents. And that is to talk about what we call Maslow before Bloom's taxonomy. So for the ones that are in education, um, um, Bloom's taxonomy is often used as a way to learn, right? So this is a framework that is used to build curriculums. A lot of the tests, the testing, the metrics that we use to see whether kids or gifted kids are doing well, look at Bloom's taxonomy because it takes kids from learning something, from knowledge to applying it into self-evaluation, which is the final step. However, we strongly believe that if you are not in the right emotional state, we cannot work with kids. And this really applies in the same way to how we as parents think about stuff. And it's quite logical when we are not, Maslow's theory, and it's quite an old theory. It's been revised a few times since, but Maslow's theory says that there are certain needs that we have that almost like the base of a pyramid have to be met before you can move on to the next stage. And if you don't meet those needs, you will fall back towards towards the lower state. A very good way to explain this is that if you look at physiological needs, for example, so he said there's physiological needs, there's safety needs, there's social needs, also often known as love and belonging, self-esteem, which is around what like your own self-vision, your self-worth, and then self-actual and how you're being seen by society. So this is specifically how we tend to compare ourselves towards others. And then finally, there's self-actualization, which is where you really try to be the best person that you want to be. And what we tend to see is that those last stages of Maslow's pyramid basically are where we work on the things in Bloom's taxonomy. And we in Passend Education say that actually social has to do with your happiness. So feeling socially accepted, feeling loved, having some people to belong to, that is also a core element of what it means to be happy. So if you're not happy, you cannot move on to the next stages. Now, of course, physiological need, which is eating and basically other like some kind of reproduction needs, often part of that too, are basic needs that like are very logical when you think about it. Like if you haven't eaten, you're more likely to try and do things that are very dangerous to try and get food. So if you really get to a point you're starving, you will do anything you can to focus on this before you move on to the next stage, right? So once those food needs are met, that's when you can start thinking of safety. So I've got a full belly. Now the next step is like, do I have shelter? Can I make myself safer, right? And this is obviously where we believe that a lot of the home situation plays a massive role, right? So if you as a parent, the first steps you normally try to take is making sure your kids are well fed, they have a roof over their heads, they can sleep in safety, and generally speaking, that's great. However, the many parents I work with, they sort of try to skip the next stage. They sort of, and it's not obviously the same for all parents. I'm sure most parents love their kids dearly, but there is often a disconnect between what the kids perceive as being socially accepted or being loved and belonging to the family, and how, particularly in very traditional family structures, sometimes the hierarchy of what you're supposed to be doing as a child and as a parent and what kind of how, and particularly in Asia, where the center of how you look at that stage is like the family comes first, then the individual. Whereas in the West, it's often more like the individual comes first, and the family, the greater family, comes second. Right, so there's a bit of a disconnect often between what the parents want and what the kids want. So self-esteem and esteem itself, like, is about like how do other people perceive you. And the term in Asia is often being used is losing face, or making sure that you look well in front of others. There's a lot of um, focus on appearing outwardly correct, right? So this is where that self-esteem bits is, and then the social bit is sort of overlooked, right? And then the self-actualization doesn't, obviously, if you can't reach the self-esteem part, right? So the parents think, okay, the esteem part is working, but the self-esteem part, so the child or you as a parent yourself feel like, no, this isn't working, then the self-actualization is never going to happen. Right? And that means that, like, when often we look at the outcome of what we do when we try to teach kids things, we look at like, okay, well, do they have knowledge? Do they know things? Do they understand the knowledge that they have? Right. So first we ask them, just read. Then we want them to comprehend what they learn. And then they have to apply what they've learned. Right. So can you actually do something with the knowledge and the comprehension you've gained? And then can you analyze what you've done? Right. So can you talk about like what happened, and say, okay, this went well, this didn't go well. And then can you synthesize that analysis into creative new thoughts? And then finally, can you use that to evaluate the overall situation and think for yourself? And this is also a bit of a hierarchy, although you can sometimes say that some people have more of a feel for certain parts. So some people like to apply by learning, right? So Bloom's taxonomy isn't a pyramid as such, but it's very common that we say, okay, we have to start with knowledge, right, before we can actually talk about comprehension. Now, those are a little bit older ideas. Like a lot of problem-based learning and project-based learning basically say, no, actually, you can you can start with analysis, for example. And what we tend to see is that the higher somebody's intelligence is, and like so, and how the higher your smarts are, the more likely it is that you can actually work on higher ranks. And there's a little bit of an element of course, your own aptitude, how high is your IQ, experience specifically, like how much experience do you have with the subject at hand, and that allows you to sort of move higher up into this, because we do see that there's a hierarchy here, and we tend to see that the people that are very good at evaluation, they tend to be the people that get paid more. Right. And then what happens is that a lot of parents, particularly, they want their kids to do well because you are worried about their safety and their physiological needs, which we need money for. Therefore, we need to try and measure whether the kids are evaluating. And there's a lot of friction here. Like when I talk to parents, and then I've had parents in front of me that really broke down, crying, saying like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know how to help my child. They're not communicating with me. What we tend to find is that the analysis from the parents sit all in this particular area around the Bloom's taxonomy. But what we are starting to see is that a lot of it actually starts with a problem around the happiness. Now, of course, when we have situations at home where there's abuse and things like that, then the safety needs are not being met, and then the situations are even more severe and dire. And unfortunately, the way that we sometimes work with our kids around food, like I get a lot of parents ask me, oh yeah, like you're doing stuff after school, is there a way for them to eat? And what we do in our classes is say, look, if you're hungry, you need a little bit to eat, just eat. Because if a kid is hungry, we cannot work with them on the things that we want to work with them at all, right? So that's the core concept of where we are. Like, and that's important because we're going to be doing a little bit of case studies, and then we're going to analyze and see where the problem is, in the hopes that you as a parent can use that as a role model, or like where you can say, like, how can I apply this with my kids at home? Right. So, so the thing is, maybe this is a good question to ask is, when you look at your kids and there's a disconnect between what you want to happen at this point and what the kids are making happen, um, and the child is upset, do you see them become more logical or less logical, generally speaking? And I'm sure that you agree with me that the answer to that is they become less logical. And we know from a neurologic perspective that once a fear is present, so the areas of the brain that make decisions, and the logical thinking that the prefrontal cortex does gets inhibited once certain emotional states get triggered. And that chemical process of particularly making decisions sits in the same area of the brain where fear sits. So when that activates, it stops all the logical thinking. And what you need to understand is that this Maslow hierarchy of needs, most of the time, if a need is not met, it immediately triggers a fear response in our kids and in ourselves, right? So that means we go into a fear state, which means we'll go into fight or flight often. And fight or flight can look different with different kids, so or different people. And we often call it avoidance behavior. So there's certain kinds of avoidance behavior there. Now there is a little bit of an interesting school of thought, of course, on like okay, what does that mean? It's like nowadays a lot of people say, okay, so feeling an emotional state is something we cannot control. Therefore, um, like it's okay to have all your feelings, and that is definitely the case, right? So you have all your feelings, and you should be able to feel them. And a lot of parenting, a lot of schooling works around the idea that like you have no control over your emotions completely, and that is half true. Right? Because actually, there's a few studies very recently that show that, like, for about 50% of the time, we are capable of changing our emotional state. And this is very common in sports, like very high-end sports, where people like work themselves up in a state of righteous fury, where they can really focus on doing better. And there's another theory called fish theory. It's been around for quite a while. So maybe if you've seen the book Fish Theory itself, and this is one written by psychologists from San Francisco, where she said actually, like when you look at fishmongers in the wharves in San Francisco, these guys have managed to figure out how to choose their emotional state, and these two beliefs are very much like opposed. And what I'm saying is, it's technically the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? So you can have an impact on your emotional state. You can have some choices in how you want to feel about things. Actors do this all the time, where they make themselves feel sad and then they go through the actual emotions, even though the sad situation isn't real, right? So we know we have some level of control over our emotions. But when the emotions are too strong or too sudden or too unexpected, then the actual the emotional state is completely involuntary. So once the emotion actually happens and the chemistry and the chemicals start working, then the control is not there, right? So that means if we work with our kids, with gifted kids specifically, we have to understand that for a lot of gifted kids, things are more intense, right? So when they decide to get into an emotional state, their control does go. And then one of the biggest challenges that we see with parents understanding their gifted kids is that they think, because they are quite good and quick in reasoning and often more advanced than their peers are, their age peers are in school, that their emotional states are the same. And that is definitely not the case. Most gifted kids actually, a lot of them develop asynchronously, as we call that. So their emotional states actually lag behind, not just like that they appear smarter, or they talk about like 2 years they're senior in terms of like language structure, sentences, words, vocabulary usage, but they often aren't like, if they're 6 years old and they speak like an 8-year-old, their emotional state is very often that of like a 5-year-old, right? So and that when you first meet kids like this, you think, oh, they're quite smart, but then the emotions come out. It's like, oh, something is happening here. And then this is where I see a lot of guilt with parents, because they can see this this disconnect. They can see people judge their kids, and then they go, "Oh, these kids are quite well put together. They seem very clever. They ask interesting questions." And in the next moment, they seem to act like toddlers, even though they might not be toddlers anymore. And that obviously that hurts a lot with your own self-esteem. Therefore, it creates a lot of challenges with us as parents. All right, so that is the basis of what I want you to think of, and this is important for the next thing because I want to talk a bit about a case. We had a question in our questionnaire this week, and the question was as follows. Um, I read most kids learn between 5 to 7 years of age, and I'm a bit concerned my 8-year-old refuses to learn and gives up angrily when a few random unsuccessful tries happen, and then she will accuse the parents of saying, "Oh, you always make fun of me." Right? So we'll take this as a very good example of a child struggling, and then of course the worry that parents have as a result. So um, without naming names, this particular child has been with us for quite a while. When she started with us, she was indeed extremely scared to try anything at all, anything at all. To the point where she would sit down in a corner, break down crying, like inconsolable for quite a while, and like would get angry, and then would start blaming everybody else around her for that particular situation. Right. So what we're dealing with here is a girl that is, of course, quite perfectionistic. Right. So and what it looks like to us is an overreaction. Right. So this girl is overreacting to what we think should not be something that problematic, like just writing a few words and so on. Um, so where does this sit? So what the parent basically is saying is like, well, um, I see that the development of certain things start to happen but between the ages of 5 and 7, and she's 8 years old. So I'm concerned that she's no longer engaging. And what is happening here is she's trying things and she's failing at the application stage, right? So she tries something and it doesn't work out the way that she wants to. So and she's quite a clever girl. So she normally reads something once or twice, understands it, can talk about it quite well. But then when she actually has to do something with it, she freezes up. So if she has to write a word down, she's worried to. She used to be so worried that she wouldn't write a single word. And what we needed to do with this girl, we needed to write stuff on purpose wrong, and we had even a bit of an agreement with her in class that we would once in a while write something wrong on purpose, and then we would laugh about writing something wrong. That means that we as teachers had to write something wrong on the board. And now she in our classes she's pretty open. She doesn't care about making mistakes, so she actually tries lots of new things. Right? Where she still gets a little bit frustrated is when she has to do things with her hands, because her motor skills have really not developed as well. Like, so whenever she has to cut or do things like that, there's still a lot of frustration, which is slowing down a lot. But the parent is looking at like, oh, the application phase isn't working, right? So we need to work on her applying things. But what is actually happening in this particular situation is that the parent is making an analysis of. So the parent is actually operating at an analysis stage. Like, okay, why isn't it working? What do we need to do? And so on. Right? And effectively, like that disconnect, like between here, seems where the gap is. And in traditional situations, you would go, okay, well, that means we just have to do it more, right? And then we just have to like talk about it more. But what the girl is saying is like, you're making fun of me, right? So the analysis of saying, oh, that isn't working well, is her saying, oh, you're just making fun of me, therefore I don't want to do it at all, right? So where is the actual problem? The actual problem is here in the self-esteem side of things, right? So she basically thinks that she can't do it, right? She's scared to fail. and she is fear of failure. So this is what we call perfectionist meltdown, which happens quite a lot. So what you're seeing is there's a physical fear. The fear is real and very sudden, and often, like when you look at education, like essentially when you get to so when you're 8 years old, things start speeding up a little bit more. So the situations that come at you become more intense because they're new, and there's also a little bit more judgment, generally speaking. And this is one of the main reasons why in Japan they don't, and in the West we don't actually deal with grades until they're 12 years old, because that we should be working on the social bit, right? So there's a lot of things being said about the Japanese system, where in the first couple of years they only work on cohesion, listening to each other, collaboration. There's almost no work around like grades at all. And what we know is that actually that has a lot of positive impact on this particular stage, right? So what we're seeing here is that there's a difficulty with self-esteem. But what she's saying is, she says, like, you're making fun of me, right? Which is basically is a statement of, you're not alongside me. So where the dad might, if you know this particular situation, where the dad or the mom might think, oh, this is a self-esteem issue, the actual issue is the love and belonging part. She feels not heard. She's saying, you're just making fun of me. Whether true or not, that's what she feels, right? So she's struggling with this bit here. Okay. Now, what that means is that, like, we're dealing with an emotional fear state. The logical part of the brain shuts down, and any of the conversations with teachers, with anybody around, all of this logical stuff is just not happening. And um, so this is not a thinking problem. It's a state problem, a state of emotion problem that we need to work with. And that comes down to basically the important part in this. This is a very good example of why, like, you can sometimes spend hours and hours and hours talking about all the stuff that is happening in Bloom's taxonomy with the teacher and nothing moving, because the actual parts of the brain needed to do this are just not functioning in that particular way. And then you as a parent start to get panicky and frustrated, and you start actually acting emotional too. So how do we deal with this? Like, what can we do as parents to help our kids? Well, technically, this is the same kind of stuff that we have to go through, that our kids have to go through in our system, which is a little bit of getting better at emotions, right? And that this is where that 50-50 comes in. You have to choose your emotions when you still have the chance to choose them. And then when you have your emotions and they're not desirable, you need time to let them go and wash through them. So these are the two opposing strategies. One is saying, okay, I'm not going to be negative at all, I'm only going to be positive. Or I'm going to let the emotions go through. And you need to do both. If you don't do both, then you're going to get into trouble. So let's go through a few strategies for the first one, which is calming down. So what can we do? Well, the first one is taking a pause. So it takes about 90 seconds for a lot of our emotional hormones to sort of work their way out of our system. So we need to calm down, right? Some people say count to 10 and so on. I'm a bit more of a mind that often needs to be more, but like, you need more time. But it really depends on how much you overreact to stuff. So if you feel a lot of these conversations with your kids are emotionally driven, you need more time to calm down. And what we do with our kids, and I'll show an example of this, is we have these kind of pause routines. And these pause routines are basically steps of mindfulness that you can use to sort of calm yourself down. Now, a good example of one of this is, I'll see if I can present this shortly. Hopefully this works. Yeah, there we go. So this is a this is an example of a pause routine. Now, when we work with the kids, we make them a little bit more fun and entertaining. So this particular one, the boy loves Rubik's cubes, and if he said if he got upset, what we told him is like he needed to tell people, "I need a break." So this is a thing as a parent you should be able to do as well. I need some time. This is a good phrase to use to your kids. I need some time. I am upset. Then he would take a Rubik's cube and he would scramble and unscramble it. Now this boy could do it in like 10 seconds. But for some of us it takes a little bit longer. I need a couple of minutes. So if I were to take this, then as a parent you could say, okay, I'm only doing part of this. That's fine as well, right? So um, yeah, so basically this is the so you unscramble stuff, and then it involves a breathing technique. Breathing techniques can be myriad ones. Like go on YouTube, find a breathing technique that works for you. We got box breathing, we got physiological size. There's lots of different things that you can do that will help you with calming down, right? So you should have a little routine. Like, so calming down should mean you should have a little routine. Let me see if I can stop presenting this, and then whether I can. Uh, okay, whether I can present again. There we go. That should work. Yeah. So calm down. So you should have a pause routine. Now, again, what that could look like, really your call. There's lots of opportunities. Like if you want to, you can reach out to us and we can help you build one for yourself, make it a little bit more fun. Maybe you can make one together with your partner. There's lots of ways that you can do that. So calm down and have a pause routine. What is really helpful in this is actually using like lower voices. So what that means is like reduce the volume that you have in your and do that purposefully. What is really interesting is whenever we are running classes ourselves, sometimes the class is a mess. Most of the time, to be honest, they're all very creative, gifted kids. And if you just shout at them and say be quiet, actually it barely works. If you talk very softly, very calmly, you'd be surprised how much that change of energy helps. I had a little girl that was like really upset, didn't want to go home. Like was telling her mom, like, I don't want to go home. This is frustrating and everything else. And she was like walking away while she was doing that. And as instead of chasing after to say, I lowered my voice, even though she was being quite rude, lowered my voice, calmly said, and she sort of came back trying to listen, right? So you'd be surprised how much power you can have by changing your tone. All right, so that is one strategy. You need to learn how to calm down. And if this is really tough, sometimes the best thing to do is actually ask for some help. So um, as a parent going and we find it often that we're very alone ourselves. So we ourselves are often feeling a bit like left out in that social run for Maslow's hierarchy. So what can you do? Do you have friends that you can speak to? You can go to see a clinical psychiatrist or a psychologist. Like there's people that can help you with that kind of stuff if you need to, right? And there's no shame in that at all. So let's be clear, like getting help, you're more than welcome to come reach out to me as a parent as well. There's lots of ways that we can show you you're not alone in this, right? So that's a calming down. Now, the next thing is a bit of is essentially also a bit of a strategy, which is the idea is that the strategy is to co-regulate, not control. So co-regulates. There's a difference. So no control. Because we often have this idea that, they're kids, they have to listen to us. And, from a social perspective, you could say yes. But again, like if they believe that they don't belong anyways, and they've sort of given up in their mind, like then like why should they listen? They don't feel heard. Now they might not be correct in this, but that's what they feel, right? That's the disconnect. So if you're trying to control them, do you think you can make them feel like they belong more or less, right? So co-regulation is the actual thing that you want. Which now co-regulation looks at a few different things, and this is the example would be sitting next to somebody, right? So that means don't tower over them, don't immediately hug them all over the place and stuff like that. Just sit next to them, close, be present, right? So don't be on your phone and other kind of, be present, but don't be the one basically that initiates the oh, are you okay, all that kind of stuff. Let them do this, and that means you need to slow it down a little bit. So sit next to them, slow it down, use your lower voice. And a good thing that you can say is like, things to say is like, I'm here, right? So I'm here with you. I'm here with you in this experience if you want to, but I'm not going to be the one dictating. I'm not trying to control it situation here. What you're trying to do is you're trying to defuse the situation and let them get the time that they need to bring down their own emotional state. Um, so the next thing, the next thing is to name the emotion. So naming the emotion is sometimes quite hard. Like, so that means that you as a parent maybe need to do a little bit more work on understanding emotional language. The We use the movie Inside Out a lot with the kids because it's such a like a really good framework of how emotions work, how emotions blend into each other. And what is really nice in the English language is that for every blend of different emotions and different time frame that emotions are being experienced for, and so there's a different word for them. So like you have trepidation, which is a combination of like anxiety and happiness, for example. There's many words that can be used to describe different states of emotions, and that is important because um, being able to really say what you feel is a good step towards understanding often where the triggers come from. And you'd be very surprised how sometimes things, when kids start to understand the emotional language, they find out that the actual emotion that sometimes is there is much different than they thought. So a very good example is this: I had a boy who was extremely angry at his little brother all the time, like to the point where he was teasing him, like bullying him, always fighting him. And the he couldn't quite explain why he was doing that. And we had to work through lots of different kinds of emotions. And basically, at one point, we figured out that his real emotion was jealousy, right? So that was the emotion that sort of triggered all the things around it, right? And we as parents sometimes also don't necessarily know why we react the way. So you need to understand and name the emotion, right? So um, like, okay, so how do you feel, and or like, how would you describe that? And again, when it helps if your kids are more aware of different emotions. We do a lot of work like this in our classes with your kids, but it helps if you also at home do this, because and particularly if you are not necessarily communicating in English with your kids, right? So I know there's a lot of bilingual parents out here. So what are the words that are descriptive of the certain kind of emotions in the language that you're working with? And ideally get that baseline going before you get into these emotional states. So do some watch Inside Out with your kids. Again, that's a good way to start, but then you can maybe do a little bit of exercises around that, get some emotional wheels in your home, things like that, right? So a good question is to ask, like, how does it feel like in this state? So how does it feel, right? Like, and we're not fixing things here. So we name the emotion, but we don't fix it. The next step is to talk later. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of dads struggle with, but it's one of those things that you as a parent have to sometimes know that the strategy is to have a bit of patience. What is the best time to talk about this? And if you have a child that comes from school and they don't want to talk to you about anything at all. Like I had a parent the other day ask me, he's like, hey, like my daughter comes home and then she shuts off. Like she basically she shuts off. So she doesn't talk to me, doesn't say anything. Like she seems extremely sad and frustrated. So like I'm trying to get her to open up and it doesn't happen. And what I told the parent there as well is like, well, it probably means that she doesn't feel safe enough or doesn't feel enough of a belonging again to be able to share right now. And as a parent, what you're then trying to do is you're again trying to solve the problem, right? So you're going into a taxonomy thing. It's okay. Well, let's understand this. Let's see how we can apply it. Like, let's have a logical kind of conversation about this. And then your kid is in an emotional distress state, right? That's the thing that you need to do. So talking later is a great way of helping them with it, because if they're emotional, you won't be able to talk to them logically anyways. If they are if you talk to them about it later, they will experience some of the emotion again, but it will not be as intense as it was before. And that's when you start building up that emotional resilience, right? So they need to feel these emotions more often, less intense, on their own terms. So ideally, you should figure out a way for you to have a situation where the kids can talk to you. So what can you do to make that happen? And if that means taking one of your children, if you have multiple, in a car, drive somewhere, do something with them completely unrelated, you'll be surprised how much they'll open up as a result, right? So delaying when you talk about it is really, really good. Okay, so let's talk a bit about some mental strategies that you can apply that help you keep sane, right? So basically strategies. Um, One idea that I like to put forward is that you don't have to win every situation. This is really important if you have strong-willed children. There's a few things when you talk about strong-willed children is that they often they shut down. They either become super angry or they could be completely non-communicative. And a lot of gifted kids have very strong opinions on things. Now that doesn't always reflect in them acting out a tantrum. Like this could basically be a girl shutting down and not engaging, right? And just like not responding to anything. And if you're going to basically try to fight that battle, the problem is that they have more energy than you as a parent. Most parents are older, working hard. They have a lot of other stuff on their mind. Sometimes there's other kids involved, right? So they have more energy than you. So if, let's say, you're trying to fight on one thing, like get you clean up your room, and then they shift to doing something else that you also want to do, you're basically sapping yourself from a lot of difficult situations. Whereas if you go, okay, what is the one thing you want to change? Like what has the most impact? There's often, if you start thinking a bit about it, like there'll be normally one behavior that sort of dictates everything else. And if you find one of these underlying behaviors and you go firm on this one thing, but you let the other things go, you will have a lot more energy for it. And it's quite magical when you start doing that. You'll be surprised how it kind of confuses the kids, because often when you start deciding, okay, I'm going to pick this one thing to work on and I'm going to see it through. If before this you were always trying to fix everything in one shot, the kids are going to be a bit confused. Like, oh, you're not working with this. You're not talking to me. You're not telling me off. It's so. Of course, we want our kids to clean up their room, but realistically, like the ones that really suffer from it are they themselves, right? So, do you want to fix and cleaning up the room, or getting ready for school on time? And then, which one is the more important one, right? So, in getting ready for school on time involves you having to do stuff for them. So maybe fix that first before you start talking about the other stuff. And it gets another interesting opportunity to actually reward them for the right behaviors, which actually is how you can get kids to really engage with the next bit. So when you get one behavior right, and then you reward them properly, then yeah, you'll do well. Now there's a bit of a hierarchy here that is really important, right? So first of all, you don't need to win all. So this is win the war, not the battles, right? But you need to pick your battles, basically. So pick your battles. And that means there needs to be a bit of a hierarchy in what things are important. So, because you can't let them do everything. That's, of course, not okay either. So, the first one is safety. So if safety is in question, that always happens first. When I get kids in my center that I do one-on-ones with, and they're very difficult. I have some kids that absolutely don't want to be there, but school has decided that they have to uh, get some kind of help, some kind of intervention. Some of them are on the brink of being expelled. There's lots of difficulties there. I have two rules that I say to them. It's like, look, actually, um, if I'm going to work with you, I've only got two rules. One, we don't hurt each other and things around us. So we have respect for each other and things that we have, which means no throwing things and so on. And you're not allowed to leave unless both of us agree. That's the only two rules I have. And if they overstep those rules, then I get super firm with them. But I get them to agree to those rules before we even start. So one of the very first things is before it's like, okay, you're here. This hour is yours. You can do what you want with it. So I'm not picking a battle with anything at all, right? But you need to agree to those two rules. Safety comes first. That is non-negotiable, right? And that makes sense. The second one is values, right? So you work on safety, then values. Now, safety is always, right? So no compromise. But values is often, right? Values are difficult sometimes for people to understand, right? And this is one of the reasons why we read stories to people, why we have fairy tales and all. And of course, you could argue that all the religious books are really value systems to begin with, right? So, like story-driven values are very important. But even within religions and even within stories, there's lots of discussion about what values really are and what they mean, right? So like values are important, right? So they do govern how we become social beings, how we engage better with everybody around us, but they aren't as black and white as they sometimes appear to be. So the answer is often you need to show your values, you need to discuss your values, you need to basically try to convince them of your values. And you'd be surprised that some of your gifted kids can actually come back with some values too. You go, oh, actually, that's another way of looking at this. That allows you to basically form your own values. And when we work with the kids in the class, what we do is a lot of indirect ways of getting the kids to experience what a value is, discuss how they're being applied, and through creative writing and other kind of tools that we have, these kids really start to understand, oh, this is how we should behave. And then what something magical happens, the language changes. They start, instead of using big word like sentences and stuff about things that they don't like, they start to say, oh, like you're just not being kind, or like I have a problem with your cleanliness. And all of a sudden there's a lot of things there that they sort of understand as like big concepts, and therefore values you should often pick a battle on, but not always. And the last one is your preferences. So as a parent, you have things you want your kids to do. And this one, what you have to do is you have to let go. And this is harking back to happiness. Like happiness is agency and responsibility. Right. So that's the two key drivers of happiness. If you are very firm on your preferences, you will either diminish their agency and or their responsibility, and that leads to less happiness. And that in its turn will lead to it's like a reduction in the love and belonging bit, which means that the logical part of your relationship building will not happen. Therefore, you're always in an emotional state. So preferences are the best way that I sometimes explain what a preference is and why it's okay to let go is a lot of parents I work with, they have preferences of what they want their kids to do when they grow up, or how to act in school, because they want to prevent their kids from making the same mistakes that they made. And that is a very noble thing, but you need to remember that the mistakes and the struggles you've had as a parent made you what you are today. You're more resilient against certain frustrations because you had those frustrations. You learn from the anger and the anguish of losing friends and family around you as well, and that those have been formative key moments in your life. And you have to know that, like, if that basically parents that withhold that opportunity from their kids do psychologically often more damage than the ones that physically abuse their kids, which is pretty heavy to realize. But basically, you can trust your kids a little bit more, right? If you can let tell them about your preferences, but if they are working on their self-esteem, they are willing to listen to you, right? So if they feel safe in and around your environment, they will work on those preferences and they will listen to them. And one of the reasons why we think like, oh, they're not listening, that question just now of like, oh, my 8-year-old is not doing these things. Like, I'm concerned because she, like, the internet said everything forms between 5 to 7 years old. I might be a little bit too late. So that again, that that worry means that okay, I need to stop her from making those mistakes. But the mistakes is how she learns things, and that's okay. So how do you get her to feel that you're not making fun of her? That's the important part here. Okay. Um, Now, a few more things that are important. You need to protect your energy, right? As a parent, your kids are younger, they're full of vigor, they don't need as much sleep. There's lots of things that they have an advantage over you as we get older. So you need to protect your energy. And that comes from a lot of places, uh, from a lot of different places. So, for example, right? Um, do you sleep on time? Do you eat healthy? Do you do enough exercise? Do you say no to people that are asking you to do things you shouldn't be doing? Right. So you need to learn how to say no to lots of different things. Um, but protecting your energy also sometimes means like doing things like daily resets. Are you doing some mindfulness in some form, whether it's prayer, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's journaling, you know? So there's lots of ways that you can help yourself offload your own psychological stress and frustrations that come from either work or social settings or whatever it comes from, and so that you can use the energy that you stored up in fights, in quotation mark, with kids that you have. Um, and this is important for our gifted kids. And this is the last bit. And this is a bit about you understanding why gifted kids struggle, is that you shouldn't take the intensity personally, right? So don't take the intensity personal. This is just the nature of gifted kids. We know that they have these 5 overexcitabilities that are just the makeup of the neurodivergent brains that they have, which means they are often in need of more movement. They are often much more curious. Their intellectual overexcitability is there. Their sensational overexcitability is there. They feel and hear things more intensely, which includes the emotions, the emotional overexcitability, as we call it. And yeah, so, and the imaginational excitability. So the idea that the world inside them is more interesting, right? And like, if you're scared to make mistakes and everything else, but you can go into your own mind and you can use your creativity to come up with all kinds of great ways to pretend that things are going well. That's a great way to get rid of all that kind of fear. So it's not them being disrespectful at all. It's basically deregulation, or like of their emotional states that they have, that is causing the behavior that we see. All right. So the question I want to let this session end with today is that if you have all these opportunities, these strategies over here, the understanding that it's the emotional state that drives the ability to think logically, yes or no, and whether you need to help them move to the next state. So if that's the aim, if that's the strategy, what is the one situation with your children this week that you could have an impact on? What is that one battle you can choose that you could say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to be regulating my emotions, and then we move on from there. So I'll leave you to think on that. And then I thank you very much for your time today. This session will be on YouTube as normal. For those that are watching this on YouTube and want to know more about gifted kids, you're more than welcome to reach out to us for assessments or help in any form for yourself or for your kids. This is TJ from Passend Education. Thank you very much and hope to see you guys soon.